Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, a stark warning on America's fiscal health. Moody's has stripped the US of its last perfect credit rating. This as Donald Trump pushes for costly tax cuts. So, is Washington's financial stability at risk? Sanctions relief and debts paid off. Western and Gulf nations extend a financial lifeline to Syria. Will that help ease its economic crisis and improve living conditions for many Syrians? And Apple says most iPhones sold in the US will be produced in India. President Trump wants the devices to be made in American factories, but can the tech giant pivot away from China? The US debt has long been considered the safest of all safe havens. That's largely because there's next to zero chance that the government won't be able to pay its creditors. But Washington has just lost its pristine reputation as a borrower. Moodys has downgraded the nation from its top-notch AAA rating, becoming the last of the big three agencies to do so. The ratings agency has cited America's growing debt, now at $36 trillion, almost 120% of GDP, and rising debt service costs. It's criticized a lack of action by successive administrations to reverse ballooning deficit. Now, that, in theory, could push up its borrowing costs, and it raises concerns over the long-term fiscal health of the US. Now, against this backdrop, President Donald Trump is pushing what he calls the one big, beautiful bill. Critics warn that his tax cut package could add trillions more to the nation's deficit. But will it? Or could it put America's house back in order? Ferdia Carr reports.
It's the first time in more than a decade that Moody's and other credit rating agencies have downgraded the US from the highest AAA level ranking to AA1. In its report, Moody's cites failures by successive US administrations and Congress to address fiscal deficits and growing interest costs. The agency warns America's rising $36 trillion debt is on track to reach 134% of GDP by 2035. That amounts to $273,000 for each household and $106,000 for each person in the United States. The vast majority of US debt is held by the public and foreign creditors through bonds and other borrowing instruments. The rest of it is held by government programs such as Social Security and Medicare. In 2024, interest payments alone cost the US more than its military budget. It's the debt held by the public as a share of the economy that worries economists. The debt to GDP ratio measures how much the US owes versus how much it produces and indicates whether it's able to pay back its debt. President Trump made slashing government debt a key campaign pledge in the 2024 election. But the efforts by the Department of Government Efficiency, which is claimed to have made $170 billion in spending cuts, have not calmed fears about public costs. Moody says entitlement spending is likely to grow while US revenue remains flat over the next decade. That's as Trump pushes what he calls his big, beautiful tax plan.
The ayes have it.
On May the 18th, a congressional budget committee moved the bill forward. Analysts warn that it will worsen public finances. It's expected to add around $3 trillion to the national debt over the next 10 years. Moody's has also warned of policy uncertainty from President Donald Trump's White House. The so-called reciprocal tariffs on more than 50 countries due to come into effect on July the 8th have fueled uncertainty in financial markets. The White House has dismissed the downgrade, saying the Trump administration is restoring investor confidence.
When you look at the world has confidence in the United States of America and our economy once again. The president just last week secured trillions of dollars in investments from countries in the Middle East. We have seen trillions of dollars of investments flowing into our economy since the president took office.
While the growing deficit adds to bondholders' concerns over the sustainability of America's debt burden, Moody's and other ratings agencies say the US dollar status as a global reserve currency and the size and resilience of the US economy mean a further drop in its rating is currently unlikely for now. Ferdia Carr, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Ernie Tedeschi is Director of Economics at the Budget Lab at Yale. He's also a former Chief Economist at the White House Council of Economic Advisors and at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. He joins us now from Silver Spring in Maryland. Good to have you with us, Ernie. Does Moody's downgrade actually matter? I mean, it came so long after the other two agencies downgraded the U.S.
I don't think that the Moody's downgrade is telling us anything new in terms of the fiscal trajectory of the United States. If you're a bond investor or you're someone like me who follows the fiscal story of the United States, the unsustainability of America's finances is not a news story. As a matter of fact, it goes back to the first S&P downgrade in 2011, and it's been well known since then. I think what this does do, however, is it, number one, punctuates the issue for investors that this trusted ratings agency is now losing confidence in the United States. And it raises other issues beyond just pure fiscal trajectory, which is the possibility that American institutions, the American safe harbor premium for investors, who get a premium on their investment because of the rule of law in America, because of the robustness of its institutions like the Federal Reserve, that might be under threat. And that is something that would further exacerbate the economic damage from our unsustainable fiscal trajectory.
President Trump is blaming President Biden for both the deficit and the debt mountain. Is Biden to blame? Why have Republicans and Democrats just failed to tackle U.S. debt up to now?
It is a bipartisan problem, and it dates back to 2001. Back in 2001, our independent budget agency, the Congressional Budget Office, saw surpluses as far as the eye could see, and that we would actually pay off the debt, all America's debt, within 10 years. That's not, by the way, necessarily a good thing economically, but that was the trajectory that we were at the time. Several things conspired to change that trajectory. One is that we have an aging population, just like most other countries in the world. That puts pressure on our pensions, puts pressure on our healthcare costs. But America also fought two very expensive wars in the intervening 25 years. We also had three recessions after 2001, two of which, the Great Recession and the pandemic, were among the worst in American history. And the fiscal response to those recessions added to the debt. You know, in a lot of cases, it was wise policy to try to pull America out, but policymakers didn't pay back or reduce the deficit after those recessions. President Trump alone signed $3 trillion worth of COVID relief under his presidency in 2020. President Joe Biden later would sign $2 trillion worth of COVID relief. Now, I think a lot of that policy was wise, but that increases the debt.
Ernie, is President Trump's big, beautiful bill going to make things better or worse?
It's going to make things worse. So even if you include the tariff revenue, which is, to be clear, not part of the bill itself, tariffs are executive actions that the White House has imposed separate from the legislative process. The tariffs plus the big beautiful bill would still raise the deficit by more than $1 trillion over the next 10 years. The bill alone raises cumulative deficits over the next 10 years by about $3.5 trillion against what is supposed to happen under current law.
Given all that you've said, is there a danger that the U.S. could default on its debt? And if not, why the debate?
Right. So there's always a risk of default in the U.S. because of the debt ceiling process. I think that that's unlikely under unified Republican control of D.C. They have no incentive to default on the debt. But I think that default is the wrong way to think about it. As debt increases, interest rates increase because bondholders lose a little bit of confidence in, the safety and soundness of American treasuries, and they demand more of an interest rate. That actually has big consequences in and of itself, because American Treasury interest rates are the benchmark interest rates for so many other products in the American and the global economy. Things like consumer mortgages in the United States, business loans in the United States. So if interest rates are going up because our debt is unsustainable, that's not just a problem for the U.S. federal government. That's a problem for American consumers and American businesses as well. And it has spillover effects to the rest of the world.
Ernie, it's been great to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, after years of post-Brexit turbulence, the UK and the EU have struck a landmark deal aimed at resetting their relationship. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described it as a historic moment, while Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer declared Britain back on the world stage. The agreement covers fishing rights, trade flows and defence cooperation. It grants e-gate access for British passport holders in Europe and reduces red tape from most food and drink imports and exports. While the UK has agreed to open its fishing waters for 12 more years to EU boats. It's the first deal between the two sides since the UK left the EU in 2020 and comes as the Trump administration is putting transatlantic relations under strain over issues including trade tariffs and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Al Jazeera's Jonah Hull is with us now from London. Jonah, Keir Starmer says that Britain is back on the world stage, that this deal will put a $9 billion boost into the British economy. Now, that sounds impressive. Is it as good, though, as it sounds?
Well, it sounds pretty good, doesn't it? A £9 billion boost to the public purse, $12 billion. Add to that the government has said that the easing of these trade restrictions will go some way towards reversing a 21% fall in exports from the UK to the EU since Brexit, a 7% fall in imports. The deal has had a pretty positive response from business. The supermarkets say prices will come down. There'll be more choice on the shelves. And small businesses, in particular, small exporters, have had a really hard time since Brexit, dealing with onerous border checks and vast amounts of new paperwork. They're pretty pleased. But look, bear in mind, this is not a wholesale renegotiation of an entire trade deal. These are just a few sectors that are being tinkered with on a pretty limited basis, albeit both sides say they could go further in the future. $12 billion, though, represents 0.2% of the gross domestic product in this country. It goes nowhere near, as far as people would like it to, towards reversing the 4% estimated fall in GDP caused by Brexit. That's worth around $130 billion.
What concessions has Britain had to make to get this deal? Scotland's fishermen, for example, aren't very happy, are they?
The fishing industry in general, Scotland's industry in particular, are extremely unhappy with the deal, with the extension of access by French boats to British waters. That was originally brought in by Boris Johnson with his deal in 2020, now extended to 2038, and that despite the government telling them that these easing of restrictions will also be good for the fishing industry itself. A whole range of other concessions are also controversial, albeit not specifically spelt out. For instance, just how much will Britain have to align with EU rules over which it has no say in the food and agriculture sector? How much oversight will there be for the European Court of Justice? How much money will UK potentially have to pay into the EU budget for access to its defence fund? But all of this grist, of course, to the opposition, the Conservatives and the Reform Party, who call betrayal, surrender, capitulation, and who accuse Keir Starmer and his Labour government of trying to dismantle Brexit.
Al Jazeera's Jonah Hull reporting from London. Jonah, many thanks indeed. President Trump says his Middle East trip secured more than $2 trillion in investment from Gulf nations. It includes a $600 billion investment from Saudi Arabia, which has agreed to buy $142 billion worth of US military equipment and put $20 billion into AI data centers in the US. The White House says that deals with Qatar will generate an exchange worth $1.2 trillion. It includes the largest ever order of Boeing airplanes. Qatar Airways will buy up to 210 jets for $96 billion. And it outlines $38 billion in future defense spending, including investments in the US Al Udeid Air Base. The United Arab Emirates has committed to a $1.4 trillion investment over 10 years, which includes building the largest AI data center outside America and buying 500,000 advanced AI chips from US chipmaker NVIDIA. Mass destruction, a crumbling financial system and widespread poverty. Syria has been devastated by more than a decade of war and crippling sanctions. Its new government faces the daunting challenge of reviving the economy. In a significant turn of events, the US and the EU have moved to lift their punitive sanctions, while Saudi Arabia and Qatar have repaid Syria's $15 million debt to the World Bank. But experts say that meaningful economic reforms are required to put the nation back on its feet. Fintan Monaghan reports.
More than 6 months after rebel leaders ended Assad family rule in Syria and formed a civilian government, they now face a different battle. Reviving an economy decimated by 14 years of civil war and decades of Western sanctions. The country's GDP has shrunk by as much as 85% since 2011. The Syrian pound has plummeted with it. Earlier in May, US President Donald Trump announced an end to sanctions on Syria and met President Ahmed al-Shara in Saudi Arabia. European Union leaders have followed suit.
There can be no peace without the path to economic recovery, and we all need a stable Syria. We need to give the Syrian people a chance.
With sanctions being lifted, Syria's government is hoping foreign investment can unlock its natural resources and human capital.
Today, the Syrian people have an historic opportunity to rebuild their country. Today, everyone stands with Syria. Whoever wants to invest in Syria, the doors are open. Whoever wants to cooperate with Syria, there are no sanctions. Whoever wants to help the Syrian people, the path is open.
Syria's energy reserves are modest compared to neighbouring Iraq, but Damascus hopes oil and gas fields in the northeast can be rebuilt and provide steady revenue. Once considered a breadbasket of the Middle East, Syria's agriculture sector has been hammered by repeated droughts since 2006.
FAO and all other UN agencies were asking for lifting the sanctions long time ago. And we are happy that it is happening now. This is indeed helping the agricultural sector for an improved production through the access of technology that can help in better use and efficient use of the water resources.
Syria has secured some major investment pledges, but existing security risks are still likely to scare off some investors. With all the Syrian economy is up against, its recovery is likely to be slow. But with investment pledges, debt relief provided by Gulf countries, and now access to global finance thanks to sanction relief, Syrians at least have reason to be hopeful. Fintan Monaghan, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Osama Qadi is a Syrian economist who is founder of Qadi Economic Consultancy. He joins us now from Ottawa. Good to have you with us, Osama. In how bad a state is the Syrian economy right now, and what is the lifting of sanctions going to mean for it?
Thanks for having me. Syria's economy really has faced severe devastation due to 50 years of oppression and 14 years of killing by Assad regime. So, for example, our GNP went down from 64 billion to less than $8 billion between 2011 and 2024. You're talking about unemployment rate exceeds 85%. People under poverty line, 95%. Even the Syrian general budget between 2011 and 2024 decreased from $16 billion to less than $2 billion. So the economy was really in a bad shape. That will really put a lot of challenges in the face of the new administration.
So, Osama, with the sanctions lifted, that presumably means that foreign investment could also be attracted into the country. How long before Syrians actually notice any difference? What are the obstacles, the hurdles that need to be negotiated before they do notice any difference in their lives?
That's for sure very legitimate questions, because the ordinary Syrians will really start to feel the benefits of sanctions removal when central bank join a SWIFT system allowing citizens to open bank accounts, for the companies to open bank accounts, so they will be able to start their investment in Syria. Besides, companies can really invest, which create jobs opportunities for people, so they will enhance their standard of living because of improving their income and living standard. So that challenge of rejoining the SWIFT system is, to be honest, that the most backbone of benefit from removal of the sanctions.
Okay, so you mentioned oil and gas. Syria doesn't have as much oil as Iraq has, for example. What are the sectors that are going to drive the economic recovery in Syria?
To be honest, Syria is a really virgin country. Over 50 or 60 years, not even 5% of Syria's economy being invested in. So we have, even for the oil, usually they used to say, officially, we used to produce 340,000 barrels per day, and we are really suspicious about the number. But we have oil that really is enough for Syria. We used to consume 220,000 and export 120,000. But I think if the new companies came to this Syria, will explore even more and more of our production capacity, besides the gas, besides the transportation. We don't have that much really transportation networks. We really at least need extra 10 highways in Syria. We really need to improve our agriculture sector. Even like when it comes to agriculture, third of our agriculture land being invested, not even so 2/3 being wasted.
Okay.
Even for the industry, it could be improved technology, even on tourism in industry too.
Really good to talk to you, sir, on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, designed in the US but made in Chinese factories. For years, Apple has relied on China to assemble the majority of its iPhones. But Donald Trump's tariff threats have forced the tech giant to rethink its supply chain. Last week, Apple's chief executive Tim Cook confirmed that Indian factories would supply the majority of iPhones sold in the US in the coming months. But the US president wants the tech group to manufacture its best-selling device in the US. He's asked Apple to stop its production move to India. Well, in February, Apple pledged to invest $500 billion in the US over the next 4 years to develop AI. Meanwhile, the tech giant has ramped up production in India. It aims to make around 25% of iPhones in the country in the coming years. For Narendra Modi's government, the shift by some Apple suppliers into India signals progress in its drive to boost local manufacturing. But Washington and Beijing have announced a trade reset. That could derail New Delhi's ambitions to replace China as Apple's global manufacturing hub. Romesh Srinivasan is a professor at the Department of Information Studies at UCLA, where he's also the director of UC Digital Cultures Lab, and he joins us from Los Angeles. Good to have you with us. Now, President Trump doesn't want Apple to make its iPhones in China. Now he's saying he doesn't want them made in India either. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a bit of a soap opera, really, in some sense. So, of course, much cheaper labor to assemble these digital devices, including iPhones, but just hardware and technologies of all kinds is found in China and also in India. We also have to note that China and India are very much rivals and competitors, not just economically, but politically throughout history and even into the present. So you can find cheap labor in both these locations, yet there's a lot of conversation being here in the United States that we're going to try to move assembly here to the United States. And of course, Trump's entire sort of rhetoric is one about, going nationalist and America first, right? So of course, the cost, though, to assemble and produce and manufacture devices here is much more costly, and people may not even have quite the same level of experience and fluency with those things as in places like China and more recently India. So basically, this is all a geopolitical game, and it's directly tied to the incredible power that Apple has all over the world and who actually builds these technologies, noting fully well that at some point, all of that labor or much of that labor might be automated, right? It might be machines themselves, AI systems, robotic systems in this case, that might do much of that assembly line. So then the big question looms, which is what is the future of work for all of us around the planet in very different ways in different places? And how are we going to ensure that we are all economically secure as more and more gets delegated not just to Apple, but potentially to its privatized automated AI systems?
Oh my gosh, Romesh, this is a whole other topic that you and I are going to have to discuss at some point in the future, okay? For the meantime, though,
I'd love that.
Does India have the capacity, the ability to help China, to help Apple move away from China? Prime Minister Moody has been touting his country as a smartphone manufacturing hub for quite a while now, but is it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it may not be like fully at the level of China as of yet, but it will reach there. And it's already, you know, as you reported, already for the last couple of years, there's been a lot of movement over to India itself. India has an incredibly high population. In fact, the highest population in the world. I'm of Indian descent myself. And India's long been a place where many, many things are being created and produced. For example, many pharmaceuticals are created in India, but also many like devices and industrial technologies.
To what extent is the current trade war truce, let's call it that, for the moment, between the US and China, going to upset India's plans?
It likely could, right? So what Trump is trying to do is, of course, be best buddies with India in many cases. We've already seen, you know, some meetings between Trump and Narendra Modi. But at the same time, this sort of, we could say, you know, détente in the U.S.-China trade war might mean, we don't really know the details as of yet, that China requests that, you know, Apple continues to do the vast majority, if not all of its manufacturing in China itself. But then what happens to workers here in the US? Well, we know that most of us are about to experience cuts in Medicaid and I would say pretty essential services for working and middle class peoples, while there's a massive tax cut for the rich. That's not necessarily going to help with creating jobs or the overall macroeconomics of the economy.
Romesh, it's been great to talk to you. You and I are going to have that conversation about what AI is going to do to all of our jobs very soon, I hope.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
That's it for our show for this week. If you'd like to get in touch and comment on anything that you've seen, I'm at A. Finnegan on X. Please use the hashtag AJCTC, or you can drop us a line at countingthecost@aljazeera.net. As always, there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.